Well, hello, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Jessica Groskopf, the director of the Nebraska Women in Agriculture program here at Nebraska Extension. Women in Ag is excited to partner with the Center for Ag Profitability's webinar series, which typically takes place every Thursday at noon Central Time. See a schedule of our upcoming webinars and find an archive of our past recordings at cap.unl.edu. Today is the second in a series of webinars that we'll be doing featuring speakers and presenters from this year's Nebraska Women in Agriculture conference held back in February. For the latest news and upcoming events from Women in Ag, please check out our website at wia.unl.edu. Today, we are looking at managing diverse talents and perspectives in your business and in your life, and how family and employee dynamics contribute to well-being and profitability. To present, we are glad to be joined by Dr. Lindsay Hastings with the Department of Agricultural Leadership, Education, and Communication here at UNL. Dr. Hastings serves as the Clifton Professor in Mentoring Research and the Research Director for NHRI Leadership Mentoring at UNL. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses in leadership theory and leadership development, and her research centers around advancing scholar and practitioner knowledge of leadership mentoring, community leadership development, and youth leadership. Welcome, Dr. Hastings.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you, Women in Ag, for the opportunity to be here. I had a chance to interact perhaps with some of you in person at the Women in Ag conference, so I just was so thrilled to have the opportunity to continue the dialogue in this webinar format. So I'll let you know that I do not enjoy filling an entire hour just speaking at participants. So we're going to talk about some things. We're going to fill out some assessments today, have a chance to dialogue with one another. But I just want you to know that I have intentionally built in time and space for dialogue and interaction throughout this presentation, but for sure at the end. So please know, you will never offend me if you want to ask questions in the middle of the presentation, or if you want to engage at the end. I love questions. I love having a time to be able to engage. So please, by all means, ask questions, ask questions, ask questions. I love it. And my hope is that today we'll share some interesting things, but really my intention for today is to give you time and space to think about how your either family operation, your workplace, and your family might be benefited specifically from what we talk about today. And there will be time and space for you to think about your own context and how you might apply what you're learning today to those. So today is very much meant to be about supporting you and your personal and professional efforts. So. Okay, so as Jessica mentioned, I'm here on campus, on UNL's East Campus. I'm on the leadership faculty within the ALEC department. When Katie and I first had a conversation about this managing diverse talents and perspectives, both in professional and personal context, I wanted to take some time to really think about, okay, there are a number of angles that I could bring to this presentation title. You know, one angle I could have brought to this presentation was to say, like, okay, how do we help you deal with difficult people on your team or difficult people within your family? Like, how can we learn about each other's talents and strengths so we can just come to appreciate each other more? That was certainly one angle that I could bring to this, but I thought if we just end there, if that's all we do, I really felt like we were leaving something on the table. And so instead I thought, what if I bring some research on why it's important that we manage diverse talents and perspectives in terms of engagement and thriving in both professional and personal contexts, and then how can I help you enhance capacity for building engagement and thriving in your professional and personal contexts. Okay. Maybe. There we go. So in thinking about why do we care about managing diverse talents and perspectives, again, I didn't want to come at this as like, well, why do we care? Well, because if we just know each other's diverse talents and strengths, well, then maybe we can understand each other better, and then everybody can sing Kumbaya and get along better. And I was thinking, we're leaving something on the table, because it's not just a matter of, oh, if I just know each other's talents and strengths, well, then we can get along better. It's more like, actually, it has something to do with engagement and thriving. And there is some serious research that tells us that we should care about those kinds of things. So Gallup in the late 90s, they examined its 1 million employee interviews, which was available at the time in their database, to identify survey questions within their world poll about aspects of work that demonstrated the highest predictive capability in explaining workers' productive motivations on the job. And as part of that research effort, they also looked at the impact of engagement. So the reason why they were polling those questions, like which ones had the highest predictive capability in explaining workers' productive motivations, was that they were realizing that engagement really mattered in terms of outcome. So folks like Jim Harder and Wagner at Gallup, their research indicated that when we have high degrees of employee engagement, we tend to have significantly less absenteeism. When we have disengaged employees, we tend to have much higher turnover. When we have engaged employees, we tend to have higher productivity and profitability. So it's not just a matter of like, gee, wouldn't it be nice to have employees who are engaged? It's like, oh, it really does make a difference in terms of bottom line, whether or not we have engaged employees. So in my mind, like what's the importance of managing diverse talents and perspectives? Is because it impacts engagement, and impacting engagement means it impacts productivity and profitability. Okay, on the family side of the house, on the personal context side of the house, between the mid 1970s and the early 2000s, two guys by the name of Nick Stinnett and John Dufresne here at UNL, who were part of the Child, Youth, and Family Studies department. They studied the characteristics of strong families among 24,000 family members in the US and 27 other countries around the world. So this was a multi-decade research effort. And from the results of that research, they identified six characteristics that these families shared, which we'll talk about here in a minute. But it's part of that multi-decade research effort. They also published a series of articles looking at, like, why does it matter? Why does it matter that we have strong families? Like, what's the impact of that? So, and some of the results of their research and the research that they pointed to from other scholars in this space was really fascinating. In particular, the ones that I put here in this slide that really spoke to me was the impact of prolonged family conflict on neurochemistry in children. I thought that prolonged family conflict can actually do damage to neurochemistry in children. Ability to develop a strong family dynamic as an adult is directly related to family dynamic as a child, and that strong families on trend tend to produce high-functioning, emotionally stable children. Now, this doesn't mean all the time, right? This doesn't mean that, for example, if you're thinking about your own childhood background and saying, well, I had a pretty rough childhood, but I consider myself to be high-functioning and emotionally stable. It doesn't necessarily mean all. It just means on trend, that strong families on trend tend to produce high-functioning, emotionally stable children. So, but point being, why do we care? Because when we can manage diverse talents and perspectives well, it makes a difference in our ability to build strong families, which have serious implications related to how we affect children's brain chemistry, are developing our children's ability to create strong family dynamics as an adult, and whatnot. So that's why I just thought I would share, why do we care? Because it's not just a matter of like, oh, well, if I can understand what your strengths are and you can understand what my strengths are, maybe we get along better. It's more like, it actually makes a huge difference. On the professional side of the house, it makes a huge difference related to engagement. Engagement has a huge relationship with profitability and productivity. On the personal side of the house, when we can build thriving families through managing diverse talents and perspective, that has serious implications for how we develop our children's brains, as well as their ability to build strong families as an adult. Okay, so now let's get more into some of the nitty-gritty on the research that was done at Gallup related to employee engagement. So as I mentioned, the results of their Gallup World Poll, the questions that seem to have the highest predictive capability in explaining workers' productive motivations on the job were these 12 that you see here. I know you can read, so I'll just go through these because you're going to end up filling out an assessment related to this. So number one, I know what's expected of me at work, having the materials and equipment needed. At work, having the opportunity to do what I do best every day. I've received recognition or praise. Someone cares about me at work. There's someone at work who encourages my development. My opinions seem to count. The mission or purpose makes me feel my job is important. Associates or fellow employees are committed to doing high quality work. I have a best friend at work, which is interesting because that was considered something to be a bonus, but not really something related to profitability and productivity. Turns out it does. Number 11, in the last 6 months, someone has talked to me about my progress. And I've also had opportunities in the last year to at work to learn and grow. Okay, so I know you can read, but I wanted to go through those 12 because now I'd like for you to pull up the handout. In fact, I'm going to re-share here. So now, okay. Now, if you would, pull out this handout, and I'm going to give you 5 to 7 minutes, and I think Ryan's going to drop those. Yes, thank you, Ryan. You are the bomb. So Ryan also dropped the handouts in the chat, and if you didn't have a chance to access those prior to the webinar today, but this is the one that I'd like for us to spend some time on now. Okay, so within those 12, so you're noticing that those 12 items are the same items that were pulled from that study at Gallup. Within each of these 12 items, I want you to think about your own professional context. So this could be a family operation, this could be a workplace, but for each item, you'll put an S next to the item if it demonstrates a strength that your workplace that this workplace engagement elements you feel like your operation has achieved. G beside areas that you feel could be growth opportunities, and NA if it doesn't apply to your workplace context or is not necessarily something of importance to your operations. So I'll give you about 5 to 7 minutes to fill this out for your own professional context, and then we'll take a step from there. Now, I know that it's super awkward to have like Zoom silence. So I'm also going to play some jazz radio in the background. Hopefully it won't show up as background noise. Let me know if you can't hear it. Okay, I know some of you are still finishing up, and that's perfectly okay. Now you can do this either on this sheet of paper, or sometimes I like to free write, having just a number of ways to make my brain engage. But the first thing I'd like to have you do after completing this assessment is think about what surprised you. Number one, so what surprised you? If you're being honest with yourself about how you fill this out, what surprised you, number one? Number two, who is the best person within your professional life to have a conversation about this assessment? So what surprised you? And then who would be the best person to talk with about this assessment and what you wrote down? Okay, we will get back to Jimmy Forrest. Don't worry. Okay, now that you've had a chance to think about like what surprised you, what jumped out at you, and who's the best person to have a conversation with about this. Prior to that conversation with a trusted colleague, a trusted boss, a trusted family member, in preparation for that conversation, I created kind of a second page of this to talk about what would be our plan. So thinking about why it's important that we care about employee engagement, and thinking about our strengths and areas of growth as an operation. What are some things, if you had to brainstorm some things that your operation or your workplace could do in the coming weeks and months to enhance the quality of life related to these areas that seem to be have high predictive capabilities within engagement, what might you suggest? So again, I'll give you probably 3 to 5 minutes to put together some ideas in preparation for your conversation with that trusted colleague or trusted family member. Okay, so hopefully this had a chance, this gave you some time and space to think about your own professional context. And again, in preparation for that conversation with a trusted colleague or a trusted family member, to be able to talk about, why does it matter that we care about engagement, and the factors that seem to have predictive value in those areas of engagement is because engagement has a lot to do with productivity and profitability. So hopefully this gave you some parameters to think about engagement in a productive way, that managing diverse talents and perspectives, it's not just a matter about getting along, but it's a matter of how do we enhance engagement, because that has a lot to do with our outcomes in a professional context. Okay, so we're going to take that same idea, that same process, and now we'll do it in our personal context. So as I mentioned, John Dufresne, Nick Stinnett, over a 30-year period, really collected data from 24,000 family members in the US, as well as across 27 different countries. And the results of their research identified 6 shared characteristics among strong families. So the first one relates to appreciation and affection for one another. And the description for that is that people from strong families care for one another deeply and regularly, and make that known through expressions of love. The next one, commitment, relates to people from strong families invest prioritized time in family activities and are committed to investing in each other's growth. The third one, positive communication, that strong families spend time talking and listening to one another to stay connected and to collective identify and solve problems. The next one, enjoyable time together. Strong families do things together and genuinely enjoy their time together. And the next one is spiritual well-being, that an individual and family dynamic is relative to this area is one that promotes caring, love, and compassion. And the last one, ability to manage stress and crisis effectively, relates to a family dynamic that seeks to prevent trouble before it happens, as well as a dynamic that works together to address inevitable challenges. Okay, oops. All right, now, sorry. Okay. Now, what I'd like for you to do is pull up this handout and Ryan, can you drop those again, just in case, I don't know if we had anybody join us after, but anyway, here's the American Family Strengths Inventory. So this is what John Dufresne and Nick Stinnett built in response to these research findings. So they tried to put together some dimensions of each of those 6 shared family characteristics, and you'll go about filling this out in the same way. So for each of these dimensions around, for example, enjoyable time together, which relates to this one, right? So that's what you're seeing here. So for each of these items that are sort of like dimensions to this notion of enjoyable time together, you'll indicate, is this an area of strength within our family, an area of potential growth, or you can indicate that it really doesn't apply to your family or isn't necessarily a highly prioritized dimension within your family. This one will take just a little bit longer to complete, not too bad, but I'll give you maybe a couple extra minutes to fill this one out. Okay, I know some of you are still working, which is perfectly fine. We'll take a similar approach here before we get into thinking about a plan. I'd like for you to reflect personally, and you can do this on this sheet right here, or again, if you like to free write, sometimes I know when I free write, it engages my brain in a different way. So what surprised you? And this one is a little bit different from the workplace engagement survey I just gave you, in that our emotions tend to be a little bit more wrapped up in our family dynamics. So I think one thing to remember going into this reflection process, when you talk about what surprised you, go into that reflection with grace for the self. No family is perfect, and every family has areas of growth within these 6 characteristics. Every single family does. So I can promise you that not one person who has filled this out has S's all the way down. So come into that reflective process, having grace for the self, grace for yourself, grace for your family, and come into this reflective time thinking about, okay, the only thing this is here to do is to not make us feel bad about areas of growth, but purely to be a conversation starter about how can we do better, right? How can we employ a growth mindset when it comes to our family? So as a point of reflection, think about what surprised you and be honest with yourself and have grace for yourself. What surprised you? And who within your family is the right person to have a conversation about this? So who can have a more emotionally neutral conversation about how you processed these items, what you thought, who would enjoy having that conversation? So what surprised you, and who's the right person to talk about this assessment and how you filled it out within your family? I'll give you a couple minutes. Now, so similarly to what we did for the professional context, as you think about prepping for this conversation that you'd love to have with a trusted family member, and thinking about family strengths, why they matter, right? It's not just something that we should sort of hope and pray happens within our family, but our ability to have personal growth in these areas could have really positive implications for how we prepare our kids to be able to build strong families as adults, to help them be high functioning, emotionally stable humans. But also it's important to our own well-being as a family, right? So what are some things? And again, my sincerest hope is that through this webinar, I'm just giving you time and space to listen to some jazz, but give you time and space to think without any pressure, just to allow you to free think for a while. So what are some things, if you could identify some things that could contribute to positive changes in those 6 characteristics, what are some ideas that you might have? Hopefully it gives you a discussion point, a starting point as you have this conversation with your trusted family member. So again, I'll give you like 3 to 5 minutes or so. I'll turn the jazz back on, and then we will get into a time for your thoughts and questions, if there's anything that has risen up that you'd like to talk more about. Okay. All right, write down your final thoughts. I know we have some questions here. Perfect. Okay. So someone asked a question around where would we find some help to mediate this, right? Sometimes we can have conversations with trusted colleagues or trusted family members. And sometimes we know our families or we know our professional context well enough to know that won't end well if we start there. So yes, Jessica has a list of mediators, and Jessica, if you want to post that to everybody, that would be amazing. There's also a faculty member within the College of Law, Kristen Blankley, who has expertise in mediation, in particular family mediation. So she could be a trusted resource as well. And I can put
I dropped that in for you already, so Kristen's details are there.
Perfect. That's a great question. What other questions can I answer? I know this is the weirdest webinar you've probably ever been part of. Normally we share about things for an hour and we learn interesting things and then we move on. But I was realizing that this idea of managing diverse talents and perspectives, like if I just talked at you for an hour, I really felt like I wasn't developing capacity. So my hope, if for anything else, is that this gave you time and space to think without judgment from others, hopefully think without judgment of yourself, and hopefully give you a starting point to have a conversation with others. So what are some other questions we can answer?
Again, you're welcome to put those in the Q&A or in the chat box. We can see both. And I believe within the Q&A, if you would like to submit that anonymously, that's the method you can do that with, is through that question and answer there at the bottom center of your screen.
Love that you love the music. There's so many times, and I almost didn't figure it out this time, but there's so many times where, especially during COVID, and I was trying to facilitate things, so I'd have people work on stuff, and then it was this totally awkward silence. So thank you to Pandora, although I'm too cheap to do the no ads version, so I apologize for that.
All right, we'll do a final call. This is your opportunity to ask Dr. Hastings a question. So again, you can place that in the chat or in the Q&A. All right, so there's one in the Q&A. My nephew won't talk to me right now. How can I get him to engage?
You're asking a great question. And this is where utilizing resources here on campus or even within your local community might be incredibly important. Because it certainly sounds like you've tried, that this isn't just a matter of today. Connecting with your nephew has been really tough. I mean, I know that in the past when we've had chronic issues within our family, again, like things that we've tried to problem solve, but we couldn't quite get a handle on dealing with an issue that seemed to be more chronic than acute, as in this one problem at this one moment in time. We accessed local counseling services, which were extremely helpful. The biggest thing we had to get over was our own pride in going. So now there may be local resources within your community. Otherwise, we do have faculty members within the Department of Psychology, as well as the Department of Child, Youth, and Family Studies, who all do work in family counseling services that they can also provide over Zoom or FaceTime as well. So anyway, for what that's worth, I don't know that I personally know how to help your nephew engage, but I will tell you that we certainly have had issues of persistent conflict within our families that we accessed a local counselor to help us with. And biggest thing we had to get over was our pride, but once we did, it was very helpful in at least unlocking a next step. Great question. And thank you for having the vulnerability to share that.
One more call. Any final questions for Dr. Hastings?
I will say too, this doesn't have to be the last time we talk. Call me, email me, stop by. My office is in Philly Hall anytime. I know sometimes, especially when we do some deep thinking for a while, there might be questions that come up a day later or 2 hours later. You're not bothering me. If you want to send me those questions over email or give me a call or stop by Philly Hall.
All right. Well, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today. A recording of this webinar will be posted at cap.unl.edu, where you can also find our other upcoming webinars. We would also really appreciate your feedback on the brief evaluation that should pop up when you exit Zoom. That helps us know how we did today and inform future webinars. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.